When I stayed over at my friend Matt's house that night, something utterly unexpected happened. Something I couldn't stop thinking about, and I knew I had to share this story with you. It was supposed to be nothing more than a simple sleepover. That's what I kept telling myself as I stuffed my phone charger into my backpack and climbed into the passenger seat of Matt's car that evening. Just a casual hangout. No big deal. Something we hadn't done in years. We'd watched a movie, laughed, lost track of time. And before I knew it, the night had stretched too far for me to safely drive home. Matt just shrugged and said, "Just crash at mine. My parents are out of town." He said it like it was nothing. Maybe to him it was, but something about going back to his house stirred up a strange, deep uneasiness I couldn't quite explain. I hadn't been there in years, not since high school, not since things had felt different. Back then, our friendship had been close in ways we never spoke about. Matt had always been the kind of friend who made you feel important without even trying, but lately, there was a gap between us, one I hadn't known how to bridge. Still, I smiled, agreed, and reminded myself it was just sleep, nothing more. The house looked the same. Wide glass entry, quiet hallways, that faint scent of detergent and polished wood. It felt warm, yet not exactly welcoming. Too quiet, too perfect, like a place that had seen more silence than laughter. Matt kicked off his shoes and disappeared into the kitchen for snacks. I lingered in the hallway, backpack still on my shoulder, soaking in the space like I was walking through a memory. That's when I noticed the closed door at the end of the hall, Dylan's room. I hadn't seen Dylan in years, not since graduation. He was Matt's older brother, about 4 years ahead of us. Back in high school, Dylan had been everything I wasn't. Confident, tall, moving through life like it belonged to him. He never bullied me, but I never felt at ease around him either. He had this way of looking at people, like he could see straight through them. Even in silence, it felt like he knew your secrets before you did. He barely noticed me back then, and yet, I always noticed him. The way he'd come home late, hoodie pulled up, hair messy from wherever he'd been. The way his voice carried through the halls when he called for Matt. And sometimes in those quick glances across the dinner table or the living room, I swore I caught something in his eyes, something unreadable, maybe curiosity, maybe nothing, but it stayed with me. Matt's laugh pulled me back. He tossed me a soda and nodded toward Dylan's room. "You can crash in there. He's out with friends, probably won't even be home. Doubt he'll care." I hesitated. "You sure?" Matt smirked. "Relax. He doesn't bite." I forced a laugh, but something twisted in my chest. I followed him down the hallway, and as soon as he opened Dylan's door, that familiar scent hit me. Earthy and sharp, like cedar mixed with something darker. The room was neat, but lived in. A half-empty water bottle on the nightstand. Books stacked on the floor. A hoodie draped over the chair. It felt like Dylan had just stepped out minutes ago. "Make yourself at home," Matt said, already heading to his room. "Spare blankets are in the closet. Bathrooms across the hall. See you in the morning." And then I was alone. The room felt too big, too quiet, too full of someone else's presence. I sat on the edge of the bed, unsure how much space I was allowed to take. My fingers brushed the comforter, smooth and warm, while my eyes drifted over the shelves lined with photography gear. I didn't even know Dylan still did that. I hadn't even realized he'd moved back in. The thought made my stomach twist. I changed into a t-shirt and boxers, brushed my teeth, and finally slid under the covers. The sheets were cool against my skin. The air was heavy, still. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for sleep to come. That's when I heard it. The front door. I froze. Keys. A low grunt, the heavy thud of boots against the floor. Footsteps, slow, steady, not Matt's. He had said Dylan was out. Probably wouldn't come home, probably. The steps grew closer down the hallway. My chest tightened. The doorknob never turned. The footsteps passed. Then silence. I let out a shaky breath and shut my eyes, but I couldn't shake the thought of Dylan in the hallway. The way he used to look at me. The way it always felt like he was waiting for something. And now here I was, lying in his bed, wrapped in his scent, with the echo of his footsteps still in my ears. Something quiet stirred inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Sleep didn't come. Not because I was uncomfortable. The bed was firmer than mine, the sheets almost hypnotic in their warmth, but because my thoughts refused to settle. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that silhouette in the hallway, heard the soft clink of keys hitting the counter, imagined him standing just outside the door. The silence wasn't peaceful, it felt alive, charged, like the whole house was holding its breath. I turned onto my back, stared at the ceiling, and rolled to my side, wide awake. The faint glow from the street lamp outside stretched across the dresser, carving long stripes of light that reminded me of the blinds in my childhood bedroom. Back then, I used to lie awake, staring at those shapes, imagining movements that were never really there. But this was different. This wasn't imagination. Dylan was home. I'd heard the door, felt the shift in the air, and yet he hadn't come into his room. Not yet. Part of me expected him to. It was his bed I was lying in, his space I was pretending to belong to. But instead he was somewhere else in the house, awake, moving, existing in a way that made me feel suddenly out of place. Maybe he wasn't even thinking about me at all. Maybe he didn't even remember I existed. Still, I couldn't relax. The pillow carried too much of him. That familiar cologne I remembered from high school was still there. But now, it was blended with something heavier, older, more lived in. The kind of scent that lingered in sheets, in shirts draped over chairs, in the curve of someone's neck. And it surrounded me now, subtle but undeniable, threading through the silence like an unspoken presence. Eventually, I sat up, told myself I just needed a quick trip to the bathroom, a splash of cold water to clear my head. But the second I cracked the door open, I caught a glow down the hall. Movement. The television was on low in the living room, flickering shadows across the walls like restless ghosts. And there he was, Dylan. He sat slouched on the couch, one arm draped over the backrest, a beer bottle loose in the other hand. His eyes were on the screen, but distant, unfocused. He wore only a plain white t-shirt and grey sweatpants, both soft, simple, and impossibly grounding. His hair was messy, like he'd dragged his hand through it too many times, and the muscles in his arm flexed slightly as he lifted the bottle to his lips. I froze. Maybe he hadn't seen me yet. I could still retreat, slip into the bathroom, pretend I hadn't wandered out at all. But something about him in that moment, quiet, distracted, yet sharp underneath, kept me rooted. Like if I moved, I'd break the spell. His voice cut through the room, low and smooth. Couldn't sleep. My heart jumped. I stepped out fully, barefoot on the cold floor. Not really. He didn't turn right, away. Just gestured toward the couch with the tilt of his chin. Didn't mean to keep you up. You didn't, I said quickly. Then added softer. The bed's fine, just different now. He looked at me slowly. His gaze carried weight, steady and deliberate, warming my skin just from being noticed. Didn't think you'd actually crash in my room, he said. Matt told me it was fine, I replied, suddenly unsure. A faint smirk tugged at his mouth. Of course, he did. I hovered in the hallway, hyper-aware that I was standing there in nothing but a t-shirt and boxers. The air cool against my legs. The faint smell of his body wash, mixed with the hops from his beer, pulled me further into the moment. The silence between us felt loaded, stretched tight, like the pause before something shifts. You can sit, he said finally, tilting his head toward the empty side of the couch. I don't bite. I let out a short laugh, too forced, too thin, but I crossed the room anyway and sank into the cushions. There was space between us, but not much, not enough to ignore the angle of his knee, the way his shirt shifted across his shoulder when he moved. What are you watching? I asked. He glanced at the screen. Some documentary. His tone made it clear he wasn't really following it. I nodded, pretending to pay attention for a moment before my eyes drifted back to him. The dim television glow painted his features in shifting blues and grays. I noticed the faint scruff along his jaw, the shadows beneath his eyes. Signs of nights that probably hadn't ended in sleep. He looked older than I remembered. Not distant or untouchable anymore, but grounded. Real. He took another sip of beer, then extended the bottle toward me. Want some? I hesitated, then reached for it. Our fingers brushed, brief, but sharp, a jolt like static that lingered longer than it should have. I lifted the bottle to my lips, tasting the bitterness, earthy and cold, before passing it back. His eyes stayed on me. You've changed, he said, after a long pause. I blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? You're different, he said simply. More sure of yourself? You used to be. He trailed off, studying me like he wasn't finished with the thought. You'd never have looked me in the eye back then. Heat crept up my neck at the thought. Maybe you were scarier in those days. He smiled, slow and thoughtful. Maybe. The silence that followed didn't feel heavy. It sat between us like something waiting to be noticed, but not rushed. I watched him lean back, his gaze drifting to the ceiling, and my eyes betrayed me again. The long line of his legs, the curve of his neck, the steady rise and fall of his chest. Like he was lost in thoughts he wasn't ready to share. I didn't expect you to be here tonight, he said quietly. Didn't know Matt still had people over. Wasn't planned, I replied. We were just hanging out. Then it got late. Dylan nodded slowly, as if weighing each word. I wanted to ask why he hadn't gone to his room. Why? He looked at me the way he had, but I held back. The moment felt too fragile, too easy to break. So instead, I just stayed there with him, letting the silence stretch like a wire pulled tight. And deep inside, I felt it. The pull, that quiet current that had always been between us. Even if I'd been too young or too unsure to name it, I knew something was building. Not yet, but soon. I don't remember who moved first. Maybe neither of us did. We just sat there side by side on the couch. The TV hummed in the background, more like an excuse for the silence than something to watch. Outside, the night had thickened. The window was nothing but a sheet of black now, and the only light in the house flickered from the screen, tracing shadows across Dylan's cheekbones. His face was harder to read in the half-light, and maybe that's why it was easier to look. He didn't feel the same as before. Back when I avoided his gaze, bracing for words sharp enough to cut, that edge was gone. Now there was something else. Weight, warmth, and the kind of attention that makes your body too aware of itself. I should probably head back, I said eventually, though I didn't move. He gave me a half-smile, unreadable, but soft. You could, and nothing more. No push, no pressure, just that. I swallowed, letting silence settle again. It wasn't empty now. It was thick, steady, almost comforting. The beer he'd handed me earlier still lingered faintly, but it wasn't the taste that stayed with me. It was him. The way his knee rested inches from mine, his shoulder brushing just enough when he leaned forward to set his bottle down, the absent gesture of his fingers brushing his jaw afterward, like they didn't know what to do anymore. Eventually, I stood, not because I wanted to, but because staying meant stepping over a line I wasn't sure I could come back from. I muttered something about needing sleep. Dylan didn't argue. He only nodded, still on the couch, letting me leave. But I felt him behind me the whole way down the hall. Back in his room, the sheets still held the warmth from earlier. I slid beneath them, lying flat on my back, eyes open, trying to will my thoughts into quiet, but they wouldn't settle. Not with his voice echoing in my head, not with the memory of that look. Like he'd searched for something in me, and maybe found it. At some point, I drifted. Not quite asleep, not fully awake. My breath slowed. My muscles loosened. The house was still, except for the occasional creak of settling floorboards. The air was cool, the blanket enough. I hovered in that in-between place where dreams start to curl at the edges of thought. Then I heard it. A sound, soft, deliberate. The turn of a door handle. I didn't move. The door opened without a creak, and footsteps followed. My body went still. Every sense sharpened. My breath caught halfway in my throat. The room shifted as if someone had stepped inside and claimed the air itself. The door clicked shut again. Then silence. Only the faint sound of another breath. Not mine. I didn't turn. I didn't sit up. I lay frozen, not from fear, but from anticipation. My heartbeat rose, steady, but loud. My eyes adjusted to the dark, picking out a shadow near the bed. And even before he moved, before a word was spoken, I knew it was Dylan. Cloth rustled, the sound of a shirt pulled over a head, the faint exhale of someone undressing with quiet intent. Then the mattress dipped beside me, slow and careful, as though the bed already knew him. The warmth of his body reached me before his touch did. Still, he said nothing. Just lay there. For a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it. That he'd only come back because this was his room, his bed, that maybe he had finally decided to reclaim it. I felt, at first, a hand resting lightly on the blanket above my waist. Not pushing, not demanding, just there. A question, not a command. Then slowly, carefully, the blanket shifted. He peeled it back only far enough to uncover my hip, the hem of my shirt, the bare stretch of skin between it, and the waistband of my boxers. His fingers hovered there, reverent, almost trembling. The warmth of him pressed at my back now, his breath brushing the nape of my neck. He was so close I didn't need to see him to know how he was watching me, like I was something fragile and dangerous at once. "You're not asleep." His voice was barely more than a breath. Not a question, just the truth, laid bare. I stayed still for a moment, as if silence might hold the moment in place. But then I turned slow, until I was facing him. His face hovered close, his eyes catching just enough light from the hall to glow faintly. "I don't know if I should be," I whispered. He didn't smile, but his hand moved again, fingertips grazing my waist, tracing the curve of bone beneath skin. "I've been thinking about this," he murmured. About whether you've thought about it, too." My throat tightened. "I didn't think you remembered me." His gaze flickered, startled by the confession. "I never forgot you." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed with everything we hadn't said, with everything we'd buried. And then, unbearably slow, he leaned in. Not fast, not hungry, just a press of warmth against my mouth, and I kissed him back. Not because I had decided to, but because some deep, unshakable part of me had always known I would. His lips were soft, but sure, offering, not asking. The kind of kiss that unfolded slowly, as if grateful simply to exist. I felt it in my chest first, a tremor beneath my ribs, my heart stumbling against the truth of it. Dylan didn't rush. He lingered, memorizing ... like he needed to carve the shape of my mouth into his bones. His hands stayed steady at my waist, fingertips brushing the heat under my shirt like it meant something. And maybe it did. I had no words, just breath and want, curling through me like smoke. My fingers clutched the sheet, not brave enough yet to touch him. But Dylan closed the distance for me, sliding an arm around my back and drawing me into him. Our chests brushed, our legs tangled, and suddenly, there was no air left between us, only heat. Only the sharp realization that none of this was imagined. He pulled back just far enough to rest his forehead against mine. Breath shaky, uneven. "I've wanted to do that since the night of your graduation," he whispered, voice raw from disuse. "What?" He laughed softly, without humor. Just a quiet ache. "You were in that stupid red gown, your hair a mess from the cap. You smiled like you didn't even know anyone was watching." The weight of it left me unsteady, so I did the only thing I could. I reached for him. My fingers traced along the line of his jaw, rough with stubble, grounding me. Down the column of his throat, pausing where his collarbone disappeared beneath his shirt. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I whispered. His eyes searched mine, stripped of pretense. "Would you have believed me if I had?" I didn't answer. Maybe I wouldn't have. Back then, he was the untouchable one. My friend's older brother, the shadow at the edge of my life, a dream unnamed. But now, he was here, real, and everything felt upside down. His hand slid beneath my shirt, palm warm and steady over my ribs, like he was holding me together from the inside out. His thumb stroked slow, reverent arcs across my skin. "Tell me to stop," he said softly. It wasn't a tease. It wasn't a threat. It was an offering. But I didn't. Instead, I kissed him again, deeper, surer, and let that be my answer. That was enough. His other hand came to cradle the back of my neck, steady, protective. He shifted, rolling me gently onto my back, his weight pressing over me, careful, but grounding. My breath caught, shaky, and then he bent to kiss along my jaw, down my throat, each press of his lips, tender but edged with hunger. When he lifted my shirt and pressed his mouth to my chest, something inside me broke wide open. It wasn't lust, at least not just that. It was deeper, a kind of recognition. The feeling of being seen, wanted, not because I was easy to want, but because he couldn't look away. We didn't rush. His touch was deliberate, reverent, as though he had been waiting for permission all this time. Every brush of his fingers whispered desire rather than demanded it. His mouth traced lower, heat skating across my skin, and I arched into him without thinking. I reached for him, sliding my hands beneath his shirt. His back was warm under my palms, muscles flexing as he moved, heartbeat steady beneath my fingertips. For the first time, I let myself believe this was real. His breath caught when mine did, and when he lifted his eyes to me, there was something almost venerable in the way he looked. "I always thought you hated me," I whispered, my voice breaking under the weight of it. He went still, pressing his forehead against my chest. "I never did," he murmured. "I was just afraid of what I felt." The honesty fell between us like a stone in water, sending ripples into places we hadn't touched yet. For a while, we simply breathed each other in, two people who had carried different versions of the same story for far too long. Then, with a reverence I wasn't prepared for, he kissed me again. And just like that, the rest of the world disappeared. Matt, 2 rooms away, the years of silence, the sidelong glances we buried. None of it mattered. There was only this, only him, only me, only now. It wasn't loud or reckless or the kind of thing you laugh about with friends. It was quiet, careful, fragile, like we were terrified that if we moved too fast, it might all shatter. Careful, too, because sometimes it hurt. But his touch never left me. His hand lingered against my face. His fingers pressed into the small of my back. His knees slid between mine like it had always belonged there. Maybe it always had. Maybe this was the moment we finally stopped pretending otherwise. The room seemed to shrink around us, fading until only the bed remained. His warmth was everywhere, his skin, his voice, the steady weight of him. The rough scrape of stubble along my neck as his lips brushed a line across my collarbone. Every touch felt like a conversation, a confession, an apology. A quiet acknowledgement of the years wasted apart. When it was done, if you could call it done, we didn't move. We didn't laugh it off. Didn't reach for our clothes. Didn't try to untangle ourselves. We stayed, my head on his shoulder, his fingers tracing idle patterns along my spine. The air was heavy, but not with tension. Something gentler filled it. An understanding, a calm so complete, it almost hurt. I had never been more exposed, but I didn't feel unsafe. I didn't feel judged. I just felt held. "I wasn't sure you'd let me stay," he said at last, his voice low and rough, rumbling more through his chest than the air. I closed my eyes. "I wasn't sure I'd want you to." He shifted, pulling me closer like that answer mattered more than I realized. His hand slipped into my hair, his lips brushed my forehead, and I knew I could have stayed like that forever. I didn't care if morning ever came. I didn't care what tomorrow held. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking ahead. I was here with him. Eventually, sleep found us. Not the restless half-dreaming of before, but the heavy kind that claimed us completely. His breath slowed, my body softened into his, and I let go. The dark wasn't empty anymore. It was full of warmth, of breath, of something new, taking root where something old had finally burned away. When I woke, the sun was barely pushing through the blinds, casting thin stripes of gold across the floor. For a second, I panicked, forgetting where I was, forgetting whose body was curled behind mine. Then his arm tightened around my waist, and the memory returned, not sharp, but warm, like water rising. "Morning," he mumbled into my shoulder, his voice still rough with sleep. "Hey," I whispered. Neither of us moved. It was too early for the world to intrude. Too sacred a moment to ruin with things like schedules, guilt, or whatever waited for us beyond the bedroom door. But reality has a way of barging in, whether you invite it or not. A knock, sharp, sudden, cut through the quiet, followed by Matt's unmistakable voice. "You up yet? I'm going to start breakfast." I felt Dylan go still behind me. The silence snapped taut like we were kids again, caught red-handed, but then he exhaled, slow and steady, and pressed his face into the crook of my neck, clearly not ready to let go. "You should go," I murmured, though the last thing I wanted was for him to listen. He didn't move. "You don't want me to." I stayed quiet. That earned a low laugh, but it didn't last. He pressed one final kiss to my shoulder before pulling back. Sitting on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his messy hair, he was a sight I couldn't unsee. Strong shoulders, skin marked faintly where my fingers had been, golden in the soft morning light. I didn't know what I was supposed to say, how this was supposed to go. Then Dylan turned to face me. "No shame, no fear. I meant what I said last night," he told me, voice steady now. "I didn't forget you, not once. And I don't want this to be a one-time thing." I stared at him. "Matt's your brother." He shrugged, unapologetic. "You're not." Something inside me gave way at that, caving in like a dam breaking. I sat up, the blanket slipping down my torso, and met his eyes. "So what now?" He smiled, small but certain. "We figure it out." And somehow, that was enough. Later that morning, when Matt joked about how I looked like I hadn't slept, Dylan only glanced at me across the kitchen table, calm, unreadable, but carrying a weight only I could recognize. I bit back a smile. No one needed to know. Not yet. Not when it was still this new, this fragile. But under the table, his foot nudged mine, and I knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because sometimes, the people we least expect are the ones who see us most clearly. So, I'll ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have pushed him away, too afraid of what it might mean? Or would you have stayed, like I did, and let yourself feel something real? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious. Has something like this ever happened to you?